I have this vision burned into my memory. It's of my grandfather, Dolik. He's sitting on his balcony, and his feet are up on a chair. That chair is in the sun, and it's hot. His little old man feet, yellowed and thickened with calluses, are cooking in the hot summer sun. But the rest of him is in the shade. There's a sharp line bisecting his shins, where his feet are in the bright, hot sun, but his body is in the cool, dark shade. And holding in his hands, he's got his false teeth, and he's looking at them with a furrowed brow and the smallest little head shake back and forth, a head shake of disappointment. And that shake radiates through the rest of his body, creating the tiniest amount of movement everywhere. He was a communist, like a true believer, real deal Soviet card-carrying communist. In fact, he held the position of propagandist at his coal mine that he worked at as a mechanic. In addition to his duties sorting and maintaining the equipment for coal processing above ground, he also was responsible for bi-weekly classes, mandatory for all of the workers. And so these miners would spend 12 plus hours in their shift underground, sweating and huffing coal fumes, and they'd come up and they would have to have themselves a little class about communism with my grandfather. They would cover topics like current events, communist economic theory, social impacts of socialism, etc. Another responsibility of his as the propagandist was busting up illegal praying circles. You see, religion was, of course, not allowed in the Soviet Union, the opiate of the masses, and he was responsible for his community at the mine. And if it was found out that someone was illegally praying, however connected they were to the mine, it was his job to go to their home and stop it. So he would gather up a group of other mine folks, and they would knock on the door and say, "I'm sorry, you may not paint your Easter eggs. This is illegal." And in his soft, gentle, kind, optimistic way, because Dolik was a big softy, he would have to report them for their illegal praying. And the thing is, he didn't just love communism because he loved communism. He loved communism because he had to. It was the only way to get ahead in this world. He came from humble origins. He was orphaned by the time he was 17, and his father had died 5 years before that when he was 12. He was raised mostly by his sisters. He told me one time that the best way to see a touring ballet from the big city was to walk in at intermission, find an empty seat at the back, and enjoy Act 2. Yeah, the thing about communism was you couldn't do it alone. You needed to know people who knew people who knew people. That's just how it worked. I guess that's the way it works here, but it's a little bit more covert there. You needed to know people in order to be able to squeeze the juice out of life. And one of those delicious droplets of juice was things. And it may seem small, but private possessions can make a life better. Little trophies, little successes. But there is no private property in a society that is run under communism. And so you had to secretly get stuff. And one of his first things that he got was a Polish toilet for his home. The apartment, of course, wasn't his. It was owned by the mine, and he was just using it. And so the Polish toilet technically wasn't his either. But all the same, he had acquired it, and he had installed it, and it was green. It was a green porcelain throne, and he was so proud of his toilet. And another pride of his was his car, Zhiguli. Only 5% of the population in the Soviet Union drove cars. It was a rare luxury, but for him, a mechanic, the pleasure of maintaining and driving a car was worth the trouble. And so he was able to, through the mine, get on a wait list. And instead of waiting the mandatory 15 years, he knew someone who was able to speed things along for him. And so he was able to get this car, but he owed the mine a solid for that one after that. And so for years, he was the personal driver of anyone's mother or mother-in-law who needed to go to a doctor's appointment or to the market or to vacation on the Black Sea. He couldn't say no. He owed everyone a ride because he owed them his car. And then for this car, he built himself a garage. But this garage was not underneath his apartment like we have in the West. No, this garage had to be on farmland outside of the city, because that's the only place that there was room for more buildings to go up in a dense urban socialist environment. So with his own two hands, cinder block by cinder block, he built this garage outside of town. So when he wanted to get his car, he would take an electric trolley out to the farmland outskirts, take his car, drive wherever he needed to go, then drive it back to his garage, take the trolley back in and go home. It was an absurd inconvenience, but one that brought him such pride and such joy to have. And he had a sister too, Zila. She was involved in raising him and they were very close. But she had decided that it was time for her family to leave, and she proceeded with immigrating to Canada. And my grandfather, true believer that he was, quietly under his breath said, "Traitor." And then out loud he said, "They'll be back. They'll all be back." But time has a funny way of making traitors of us all. So fast forward 10 years, and the Soviet Union is crumbling, visibly crumbling. Things are bad. And so he agrees to go to a visit to Canada to visit his sister. And while there, she decides to impress him a little bit, take him to Banff to see the mountains. And while there, they go to a breakfast buffet. And at this breakfast buffet, in the middle of winter, there is strawberries. And my grandfather is at first confused, and then he understands it's a ploy by the capitalists to bamboozle him. They've made plastic strawberries made to resemble real ones, but they are just there to create the illusion of a world where you can have strawberries in the middle of winter. But he tasted the berries, and they were real. Then he had to do something with that information. So he came home and he prepared for his family to immigrate. But what of all the stuff? What of all those things that he had acquired, a lifetime knowing people and working hard and trying to make his family happier and more comfortable? You can't take any of those things with you when you don't technically own anything. And so the Polish toilet went back to the housing authority because the apartment went back to the housing authority, and the car went back to the mine because technically the car belonged to the mine. But the garage he had built, the garage was just his. And so he was able to sell that garage, but then he needed to figure out a way to spend that money, and he knew someone who could help him spend that money. Now, this next part is a bit contentious. My grandmother says it was just his turn to go to the dentist. There was no ulterior motive, there was nothing special. He had just been waiting in line to go to the dentist, and now it was his turn to go to the dentist. So he went to the dentist, and when he returned, he had a mouthful of gold. All of his teeth, the few sick teeth and all of the healthy teeth, had been filed down and capped in gold. But the way my mother tells the story is that Dolik was constantly joking about the nest egg he had in his mouth full of gold that he was taking with him to the new world, to a new life, as a way of helping his family. And he said this with a wink and a smile, but within every joke there is a grain of truth. And so with this mouthful of gold and the few things that they had in their bags, they were able to pass unmolested through the border and through the strip search and arrive in the new country. And all of my grandmother's carry-on was filled with supplies to deliver a baby. My mother was 9 months pregnant on the plane with me, and there's a very real risk that I would be born on a transatlantic flight. But they arrived, and my grandfather was in no rush to cash in that nest egg. But I was in a rush to get born, and 10 days after they landed, I emerged into the world. And some years later, my grandfather finally got those teeth taken out. It was time for a better, more contemporary style mouth. And so he took those gold teeth to the jeweler to have them appraised. And the jeweler said, well, it's technically gold, but it's not really valuable like the gold we have here, so I can't really buy it from you. You can keep it if you like. And so I just remember my grandfather, his feet in the sun, his body in the shade, and in his hand, his false teeth.